So every year, Edelman does research on trust. So we study trust amongst consumers, but obviously consumers wear multiple hats. They're government people, they're people like yourselves. We all sort of go to the grocery store, pick out our foods, everyone's eating. So that's why trust is really important today when we're talking about the dynamics of trust with business, governments, NGOs, and just even our own individual networks. So this is actually Edelman's 25th year measuring trust, so happy birthday, or quarter life crisis to Edelman Trust Barometer. And what is it, or how is it measured? So we do this work in 28 countries across 6 different continents. The survey population is representative of the general population, and the Trust Barometer is broken down by country. It's broken down by demographic, however you want to cut it. For the sake of time today, I'm just going to give you a peek at the top 5 findings of our special report on food and beverage. So, diving in, let's get right into it. Global trust is high in the food sector, which is really, really great. So, good job, everyone. Congrats. That being said, grievance mindset is rising. So this is true across all sectors, but it's really important to note that 6 in 10 people hold grievances against big business, government, wealthy people. This is meaning that while trust is high, it's incredibly fragile and something that we have to take a lot of care. Within that, so within the food and bev sector, there's subsector divides. So for example, farming, as you can see here, grocery, they're more trusted than sectors like fast food and alcohol. And so you may be wondering, well, why is that? It comes down to perceived transparency, health benefits, community presence, all of these things matter when it comes to trust. Skepticism towards health claims is another finding that's, I think, incredibly important. So I think a lot of companies, a lot of brands love to put a health claim on a label, a marketing campaign, whatever it may be. Unless that's grounded in science, health-forward messaging doesn't always mean a guaranteed win. And consumers, as we know, are incredibly skeptical right now. And so you have to just be careful with what you're messaging. And then finally, uncredentialed influence grows. You'll see this theme over and over again today. But 34% say non-experts are shaping their health decisions. And this is especially true for our youngest group, so Gen Z. This means they're not turning to health credentialed advisors, but rather looking at influencers, athletes, the list goes on, family members who don't have credentials, friends, things like that. Those are the people shaping health decisions right now. So you may be wondering, okay, what do we do about this? Here are just a quick sampling of actions that will sort of pull this all together and say, okay, now what? You just told me trust is okay, maybe not great. How do we move forward from that? Number 1, feels kind of common sense, but it's worth saying, addressing grievances transparently, so listening, repeating what the issue is, and addressing that concern through various changes is incredibly important. The next is using your license to lead. So consumers do expect brands and companies to fill societal gaps that are not being filled in the current state of affairs. And so that's where going beyond marketing and actually investing in things like food access, food security, making sure misinformation is tackled. That's where we can fill those gaps. The third action is building partnership, making sure those partnerships are grounded in validation, they're grounded in credibility, and making sure you're not going out completely independently, because trust multiplies when it is shared. Fourth, operationalizing trust. And so a lot of people think, okay, this just means revenue, right? If we have better trust, we have higher revenue. But think about other KPIs that we can measure. It's employee retention, it's community impact, stakeholder feedback, things like that are equally important in building trust. And then finally, prioritizing transparency, being very clear about your sourcing, your supply chains. That can be internally and externally. And what are the processes to get there? And I think something I want to nail down here, especially with transparency, because you'll hear that theme again throughout, is that transparency doesn't just mean sharing information. It means sharing information people can actually understand. And so making sure that that is, this group may understand something, but the person outside may not. So let's make sure that transparency means it's actually something we get. All right, so now we're going to dive into Trump 2.0 at a very, very high level. So I think everyone's probably getting inundated with news alerts every hour of the day, so I'm not going to do that to you right now. But instead, I just want to talk about what is Trump 2.0 and what does that mean for the food sector. So in the last 6 months, Trump has, I know 6 months, kind of crazy, Trump has taken shape in his role, coming in again for a second term, and food policy is continuously influenced by lots of cross currents, as you can see here. And at the center of this is the Make America Healthy Again movement, initiative, campaign, whatever you want to label it. I'll get into MAHA in a lot of depth, but I think what I really want you to see here is surrounding that are these very, very intense pressures that are cutting across labor, tariffs and trade, immigration, DEI, the list goes on. And all of these things are either accelerating, complicating, making things even harder for your individual roles or for your company. So just something to consider as these forces are signaling just a lot of increasing complications. So now we're going to get into the meat of this, which is RFK Jr.'s MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. Sorry for the jump scare. So I know it's the morning, that might be a lot. So I just wanted to start with a little snapshot of headlines you may have seen in the last couple weeks, couple days, couple months. I want you to pay attention to the vast depth of content we have here. It's a huge range. We have everything from menu adaptation, farm groups, dietary guidelines, AI, MAHA, it just is never ending, right? And then also look at the titles of who's publishing these things. It's a huge mix. Different audiences, different focus, whether it's business, it's consumer-facing, policy-facing, editorial, it's a huge mix. So what I'm trying to say with that is that food policy is mainstream and center stage in a way it has never, ever been before. It's something we talk about as, just regular table conversations. I mean, just raise your hand if you've talked about red dye with a family member or a friend, anyone in the last few, okay, we got a couple, maybe some. Okay, cool, yeah. So that's a conversation I never would have had even a year ago. And I think that just goes to show how big this movement has become. So with that level of tension means more responsibility for anyone that sits in the food sector. So what is Make America Healthy Again? Again, this group is probably quite familiar, but just in case, it is RFK Jr.'s campaign to address the root causes of America's health crisis, particularly focusing on preventing chronic disease. Trump then legitimized MAHA by creating a MAHA commission via executive order, meaning RFK Jr. is the chair of this commission. They do things like investigating and assessing what are the root causes of chronic disease. And you'll see in August, they're planning to release a MAHA strategy, which will outline some policy directives. It would be remiss if I did not share the significant influencer engagement that has gone into the MAHA work. And so that includes supporters coming in the forms of wellness influencers, MAHA moms, public figures, even actors and TV personalities have joined this movement. And they leverage their platforms to raise awareness in ways that we haven't really seen policy take form. So who is RFK Jr., especially in this current role? He was nominated and then confirmed as the US Secretary for Health and Human Services, and in that role oversees 13 federal agencies. This is CDC, FDA, alphabet soup of different agencies. And this is a very different nomination than we'd seen previously, as his background is not the typical public health background that you might expect from this role. With that, he has become a very polarizing figure. So in some early stages of his confirmation, he's had a lot of criticism around his stance on vaccines. And with that, when we look at food policy in particular, because remember, Health and Human Services oversees everything from health to food, there is a lot of mixed support for policies when it comes to food. So, for example, his criticism of ultra-processed foods and his focus on improving school meals, those are the kinds of things that have gained a lot of bipartisan attention that often and previously has been really focused on sort of one side of the aisle. So finally, as I mentioned before, radical transparency has been a very critical theme of RFK Jr.'s approach to the MAHA movement. He is interested in sort of revisiting what does GRAS self-affirmation process look like. He wants to overhaul public databases and making sure food contaminants are well known in the food system. And at the same time, there's been challenges to this radical transparency push. So for example, the MAHA report was filled with a lot of misinformation and citation errors, as you all may have seen in the press. And there's also been significant cuts to staff. And a lot of that comes with lack of communication and transparency just because there's no people to do it. So what are these food priorities? I will not go through every single one of these and bore you to death. But I think it's important to note that his food priorities sit next to a whole swath of health priorities as well. So I'll just take a few examples. Ultra-processed foods. I know that this is probably a conversation you all are having. This is probably something we could talk about for 8 hours alone. But ultra-processed foods, his emphasis on reducing their prevalence in the American diet has been a huge piece of this MAHA puzzle. Whether that's focusing on school meal programs and food service, whether it's nutrition assistance programs and cutting them, looking at EU standards and saying this is the gold standard that we need to follow. These are sort of the struggles that we're grappling with. Additives, dyes, and chemicals, another great example. Food dyes is one that you all seem to be quite familiar with, so looking at that as a good example of what does policy directive look like when it's not hard regulation, but rather an intentional push for industry to move in a certain direction. So obviously there's plenty more: food safety, child nutrition, dietary guidelines, regenerative ag, chemical intensive agriculture. All these things are wrapped up in this MAHA bow. So I will not say that there's causality, because that would be wrong of me, but clearly there has been this MAHA movement has massive influence. Last week, you'll see Kraft Heinz and General Mills announce that they're removing artificial food dyes from their portfolios. In-N-Out has recently told their long-standing history with their ingredient story, and then you have seed oil-free in Sweetgreen and Steak and Shake, big focus there, as you all probably have seen as well. All right, so now we're gonna look at external pressures. So taking a step back, we'll get out of the policy space for a moment. This is acknowledging what else is at play, because as you know, this is a very unprecedented time, and there's a lot of dynamics at play. So in the top right corner, we've got evolving regulatory and political landscape, and then there's all these other things that industry is facing that are fueled by very specialized interests. So the challenges include science versus fear in food and nutrition, sensationalized media, business dynamics, and changing consumer behavior. And all of these pressures are accelerating and creating these negative feedback loops, often putting us in a tough position where there's a lot of scrutiny and criticism. So let's take a double click on those dynamics. You've heard me talk now about the evolving regulatory and political landscape. One that I want to mention in that space that I think deserves a good amount of attention is the difference between international standards, sort of regional standards in different markets, alongside federal standards in the US, and then state-by-state bans. The state-by-state piece is, I think, a very, very complicated one that it already sounds like from early conversations I've had this morning y'all are grappling with. That patchwork is making food policy incredibly complicated. Even just this morning, Governor Abbott signed the food labeling bill in Texas, and so I think it just goes to show that these things are happening really, really quickly. Sensationalized media, so influencer-driven narratives. There's a lot of space for virality, and so making sure you're prepared and understanding of, going back to what we talked about, trust action, you're equipped to address like, not your traditional media, but a very, very sensationalized, vocal, viral space. And then business dynamics, so trade policies. I know we'll talk about this more on the panel, but trade, tariffs, working with different markets, sort of this anti-American sentiment in other countries. This is sort of what we're working within that is paired with a world with a different climate challenge, supply chain pressures, lots of shifts happening there. And then finally, your health-conscious, skeptical consumers, science versus fear and nutrition. So I think these are overlapping really well, where you have consumers that are interested in clean label ingredients and transparency, and at the same time, you have this like very fear-driven headline and media coverage that's making these even more challenging. So navigating these forces takes a lot of clarity, a lot of flexibility, a lot of day-by-day understanding of what's going on in the world, and all of that is also amplified by all these new emerging voices. So a big piece, I love this image. It's a few months old, so just keep that in mind. Some of these people may not want to be associated anymore, or some of these people have jumped even further. So just one note there. I did not make it, but today influence doesn't come from credentials. It comes from connection. So figures like Joe Rogan, for example, who has a massive reach compared to CNN primetime, it's really important to see that the rise of these belief-based influencers means that consumers are turning to voices that actually affirm their views rather than challenge them. So it's something to really consider if you're, let's say you're partnering with someone or you want to amplify your message. What channels are we doing that through? I am not on stage here telling you who to partner with by any means, but it's just something to be aware of. And so, as shared previously, RFK sits at the center of this space, but he has truly become a pretty symbolic figure as well. And so I think having that association is one that we really have to pay close attention to if we're working with different stakeholders all over the country, for example. And this has serious impact on consumer behavior. I think there are some places where you'll still see a say-do gap, but overall, these voices are framing topics in ways that are almost like symbols of systemic industry challenges, whether it's corporate greed, whether it's lack of radical transparency, things like that. And so engaging with the food systems mean we're seeing more demands on our brands that rise from non-traditional media platforms and are amplified there as well. All right, as I mentioned, I won't leave you hanging. I promise it's not all doom and gloom. A lot of my job is spent working to be a crystal ball, which I am not. I do my best, but ultimately it's helping companies figure out what's next, how do we prepare for that so we're not caught on our heels, and then finally, how do we promote the really good work that we are doing in this space where there's so much scrutiny and so much criticism? So if you're going to take a picture of a slide, this is probably the one to do, so feel free to take your phone out. But upcoming milestones, just for awareness. I'm not going to read through all of these. And again, I will promise you this is not an exhaustive list, number one. And number two, these times may change. As you've seen, anything can happen. A few that I want to just call out. Publication of the dietary guidelines. I promise you that's not a typo where it says June, July. RFK Jr. has shared that there will likely be a publication in the next few weeks. We will see what that looks like. Usually the dietary guidelines come out towards the end of the year, around December. So this would be obviously a very big pivot from that. And then the other that I mentioned previously is August 2025, the MAHA Commission strategy. This is where we're going to see policy directive. And so this is going to be like, what are the priorities that we want to act against our initial assessment? and what should we watch out for. We got the Farm Bill on there. If you're in the global space, we have UNGA and Climate Week. So just a few things to keep an eye on. And then also what we're watching, as I mentioned, state-by-state bans. California is working on this definition of ultra-processed foods. That's definitely one to watch out for. Labeling, menu requirements, the list goes on and on. And then backing up one more time, overall themes to just pay attention to. So a reckoning on ingredient and nutrient quality, so watching out for pressure on reformulation, clean labeling, nutrient profile of different foods, transparency and consumer right to know. So this is expecting momentum in labeling reforms and just the echoing health freedom sentiment, so just having that constant transparency and disclosures. Food safety and risk response. So with an under-resourced FDA, for example, this decentralization food safety programs, that shift means that there's going to be greater pressure on individual companies to act independently in the food safety space. As you all are aware, there's so much risk when it comes to food safety, and avoiding anything in that space would be preferred. And then nutrition guidelines and unconventional influence. So dietary guidelines are coming. And we may even see shifts in policy changes in programs that possibly are influenced by these sort of new voices that we've seen, but also shifting consumer demand. All right, so now what? So trust, if you're looking for more information on trust, just go to edelman.com/trust. You'll find the full report. There's so much in there. You'll also find the special report on food and beverage that I took findings from this morning. This is more of a soft recommendation. If you're not already, form like a working group or some sort of informal, just like chat with your colleagues or professionals. This is a really good space for that, of like what's going on in food policy? How do we make sense of this? These things change, as you've seen, day by day. And so getting on the same page, making sure you're up to date, all of that is only going to benefit you. And then finally, just reach out if you have any questions. I know Edelman has probably worked with a handful of you in this space, but obviously these things are changing quickly.